Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to focus on the signs and interviews of the early Judean period. Now, when we look at John chapter 2, verse 13, we can see that the first Passover is about to start for Jesus' public ministry. Now, the annual Passover was the most important holiday for the Jewish people, and that brought them to Jerusalem. For Jesus, this meant that he was going to travel from Galilee to Jerusalem. Jesus was going to Jerusalem, the place that he would die, to celebrate a feast that anticipated his very death. And this is where he was going to start some of his most intense ministries. We're going to start by looking at some signs. These signs identify his authority. The first sign we're going to look at is when Jesus cleanses the temple. It's important to note that this is the first time he cleanses the temple. He does this again closer to the end of his ministries. Anyways, so Jesus gets to the temple and he sees what's happening in the court of the Gentiles, and he gets infuriated. He drives out the merchants because they're defiling his Father's house. The onlookers are just standing there helpless. No doubt they're in awe of his presence and searching for some kind of credentials as to why he has the authority to do what he's doing. They ask him, "Who are you?" And now I want you to look at Jesus' response in John chapter 2, verse 16, and then again in verse 19. Also think about how his disciples identify him in verse 17. And if you want, go ahead and read Psalms 69:9 to see what they're talking about. This is an important scene because of Jesus' prophecy about his death. So go ahead and examine the subject of the verb destroy in verse 19. It would be interesting for you to read Matthew chapter 27, verse 40 to see how this prophecy is misquoted by the mobs 3 years later when Jesus is hanging on the cross. As you keep reading in John 2:23 through 25, Jesus also shows his authority through the use of miracles. Most of these miracles were of healing nature. As you examine these miracles, focus on the response of the people after the miracles. Okay, so Jesus was a very well-balanced person. So not only does he have authority in one hand, but he also has love in another. So for this next part, we're going to look at some interviews that he has and how they're demonstrations of love. Jesus was a master evangelist, and we see that in these interviews. So in all of the Gospels, there are about 19 of these interviews with people, but two of the longest interviews happen to be in the early part of his ministries. The interview with Nicodemus happens in John chapter 3, verses 1 through 21. And the interview with the woman of Sychar happens in John chapter 4, verses 5 through 30. Now, examining these two interviews are most powerful when you put them side by side and you compare and contrast the two. It's very interesting. The man is identified by his name, where the woman is only identified by the city she's in. The man was a religious ruler of the Jewish Sanhedrin, where the woman was an immoral wife. The man sought Jesus at nighttime in secret, where the woman was approached by Jesus in broad daylight. As you do your studies of these two interviews, keep looking for different comparisons between the two, just like those. Both of these interviews are going to focus on salvation, so pay close attention to what Jesus has to say about the matter. Thank you very much. Now go and enjoy reading your Bible.